Welcome to our video debate. We have English only with Jill and Megan, and then bilingual education with Kyle and Emmy. So, English only, would you like to give your opening statement?
Sure. So first we're going to talk about full immersion into a new language and how it can boost the speed you learn it at. So we're going to talk a little bit about BICS versus CALPS we've talked about before. So BICS is like your basic interpersonal communication skills, and CALPS is really like that academic language that you get. So your interpersonal language occurs much more quickly than your academic language will. So that kind of language, though, only comes from being fully immersed in the classroom. And an example that we're going to talk about is studying abroad. You've all known a student that's probably studied abroad and come home and had at least like a good handle on the language, even if they only went for, say, 3 weeks, because of that full immersion into the language. So putting ELL students in an English-only setting means keeping them in the regular classroom, and it really just helps them learn the language quickly and effectively. So keeping them in the classroom, there's a lot of pros and cons to that, but we're going to talk about the pros. So as a teacher with an ELL student in my classroom, I would use visual aids and labels around the classroom. These strategies would help my English-speaking students as well. And Megan's going to talk about the rest of that.
So keeping ELL students in an English-only classroom with the rest of their peers will help create a positive social environment in the school overall, so the students will be able to interact with each other, make friends with all different kinds of students, and then without the social exposure to the language, students may never develop BICS, as Jill talked about before. And then another key point is that it's easier for the overall school district as well as the general education teacher. So the general education teacher would not have to purchase books, worksheets, and supplemental activities in both English and the student's language, because that can get expensive. And then especially if the teacher is buying these resources themselves, so if they're going to the store and buying stuff for the classroom, then they have to buy another set of things in the student's language that can get to be very expensive. And then a school district would also not have to hire teachers who are able to speak English as well as another language. So school districts may not have the money, again, to hire another set of teachers for this.
Awesome. So Kyle and Emmy, do you want to share your opening statements?
Yeah, so basically we come off the premise that bilingual education is the superior way to educate ELL students, those students who are coming in without a foundation of the language. If they get thrown into an English-only classroom, they're going to fall behind. They're going to get stuck in a rut, and they're going to have these holes in their education and in the content that they learn. So the perks about bilingual education is it allows the students to have a more eased transition into the new English culture. So rather than just being thrown into the deep end and kind of having a little bit of panic set in, they get to learn the content in their own native language. And sure, you mentioned that there's some costs associated with having other teachers who speak that language, but in terms of just educating the students, it provides for a superior education because they don't have those holes in the content from being stuck and maybe not for 2-3 years, only learning English, which they don't really understand, especially when it comes to higher level learning, like in high school, things like that. Or if they skip 4 grade levels between, say, 4th grade and 8th grade, and they don't really, in terms of skip by not getting instructed in the language they understand, they're going to have some significant holes in their learning by senior year or by, freshman year of high school. Another problem with the pull-out programs in the English-only pull-out programs is they take away time from academic instruction, which again that creates extra holes in their learning. They might miss a really significant lesson, or again that's going to cause problems down the road. So I'll let Emmy take over from here with our next point.
Yeah, so learning in the native language definitely allows for a better foundation for academic material than learning in a language they don't fully understand, like just English. And a strong foundational base for reading can be transferred to English once the language is already learned. And ESL learners can be instructed in English and in their native language, so that's definitely beneficial. They'll get to hear both languages and put 2 and 2 together. And students have already already have a strong understanding of their native language, so it will just be a lot easier to comprehend.
Yeah, and as Emmy said, the key points about that is being instructed in both languages. You can put the connections, and I think that's one of the critical aspects of this bilingual education, is because you can connect words from your native language to what they mean in English. And then the last thing is that bilingual education doesn't necessarily throw these students into an English-only educational setting, which is, we're Americanizing these students. We're letting them learn we're letting them keep and be proud of where they're coming from. It preserves these cultural values, and it provides more gradual assimilation into the U.S. culture. So rather than just being, as I said, thrown into the deep end of learning only English, they're it's a more gradual transition, less stressful on the students.
All right, so now I'll have the cross-examination question. So English only like to go first.
Sure. So our first question for you is, how do you expect the average general education teacher like you or me to provide bilingual instruction while trying to teach a full class?
So yeah, it's like I said, it's definitely difficult because there's again budgetary constraints. A lot of school districts, especially with a lot of ELL students, have strict budgets. They're coming from an area with a low tax base, which does make it challenging. And as for having teachers having enough time to both teach in two separate languages, that's a problem that's going to be something where the school district's going to have to come in and either have a co-teacher in your setting that actually does speak that native language and kind of work more one-on-one with the student in your classroom, or again, we're as teachers, we're always having extra constraints put on us, and between having more curriculum with less amount of time, more standardized tests, and as teachers, we just have to adapt to it.
And going off of that, for a more budget-friendly option, I guess, there's always translators. I know a student personally that had like a pocket translator, so that was very easy for the teacher to go back and forth with the student. So we could either have a dictionary, that pocket translator, or
Google
even
Translate.
Google.
It speaks to the student.
So, and then also books. There's plenty of children's books that are in their native language and then in English. So that would definitely be beneficial and more cost-friendly.
Okay. So our other second question was, what would school districts that don't have money for bilingual teachers or for co-teachers do?
So as Emmy brought a good point up there with using certain translators like Google Translate, making those accommodations that students can have a laptop with them at all times in order to kind of comprehend. And then also your handouts. What's to say that you can't just highlight your what you're creating and copy and paste that into Google Translate? There might be some grammatical errors. It might not be exactly accurate, but it's going to be a lot more understandable than just getting an English sheet, which they don't really understand. So that's something that's absolutely no cost. Your PowerPoints, you could do the same thing. They can, and again, they're going to be seeing both on their screen. You give them a laptop to use. Yeah. And, they use that laptop with the translated PowerPoint on there, translated lesson, things like that. And you can even do some key vocab that's translated. If they're, depending on what level student they are, if they're just coming in, doing the whole translate, if they're a stage 1 learner, doing the entire thing translated might be the best route. Whereas if they're, upwards of stage 3, stage 4, and they kind of have a good grasp of the language, you can always do, have the vocab in both their native language with their native definition, and then the English definition, so they kind of acquiesce that a little bit faster.
And our last question is, some people believe that having separate programs for ELL students to learn bilingually segregates them from students in the English-only settings, making a poor and divided social environment. How would you address this concern?
Sure. So,
some people believe that having separate programs for ELL students to learn bilingually segregates them from students in English-only settings, making a poor and divided social environment. How would you address this concern?
Yeah, I agree that having them segregated could definitely they wouldn't have as many friends because they don't understand English. I think it would be if there are any other students that speak their English, say the ELL is Spanish speaking. Hopefully there's another student that speaks Spanish so they can get along with one another and they can converse and play games together. That would definitely be beneficial, but otherwise the other students just have to understand that that student doesn't fully comprehend their language, and maybe they could help them out a little bit. And I think that there shouldn't be any barrier, but of course, a lot of times there will be.
Yeah, and to go off of that, a lot of the suggestions that we offered earlier are options that you can still educate in a bilingual sort of manner, where they're still being kept in their program in school. Like I said, the Google Translate's an option for a low budget, where they're not going to be excluded from the social environment. They're still in the classroom, they're still learning. And they can even use that as a method to interact with students. Sure, it's not optimal, but it's a way to start learning language, learning social skills, and using technology as a benefit, to help aid in that transition.
Nice. So bilingual education. Would you like to ask your cross-examination questions?
Yeah, sure. Our first question is, what would you do if ELL students in an English-only classroom started to feel uncomfortable from not being able to understand instructions, thus leading to a negative impact in their learning?
So the first thing that I would probably do as a teacher would be to pair them up with another ELL student or just another student in the classroom. So if they have any questions that they can ask them, and especially if they're become friends with them or already are friends with them, they automatically feel comfortable and included. And just as a teacher, it's your job to be a resource and a friend to your students and to make them feel like they're comfortable, whether they're English speaking or not. So definitely just having that good environment in your classroom and making them feel included is important. And just providing resources, just like ones in the SIOP model and the lessons that we have taught already, that the point of doing those lessons is to provide instructions, even if it's just in English, that people who are still learning English would understand, like having visuals and videos and things like that. So I think there are definitely ways that you can make them feel comfortable in an English-speaking classroom.
Yeah, and going off of that, we can also do what we learned about the learning styles, incorporate many different learning styles. Like if they need the visuals, they want to work independently or they don't want to work independently. I think this can also make them feel a little bit more comfortable in the classroom by making sure you're addressing their needs as well as getting them in through the whole classroom, as Jill said.
So our next question for you is, some people believe introducing a student into introducing instruction in the student's native language allows the student's learning process to develop faster. And I spoke a little bit about that. How else would you help a student understand instructions in an efficient way if it was in English only?
I think it's actually kind of the opposite. I think if you're fully immersed into a language and you have basically no other option to learn it, that you will learn it faster. I think it's just like playing a game or learning a new skill where practice makes perfect. And if you are, using your native language a lot during the day, you're not practicing English as much. And it will be extremely hard at first, and I completely understand that, but the more you practice, the more you get better at it. And again, I'll bring up the study abroad example that, they're probably not speaking English very often when they study abroad, come home knowing a decent amount of the language a lot of the time.
All right. Do you have anything else to add? Okay. The next question is, teachers who have an English-only class may become like cops who are consistently enforcing the usage of English, which may waste time and frustrate an ELL student. How can a teacher work around this issue?
I think it goes back to the first question again. It's your job as a teacher to make them feel comfortable and be their friend. And if you're presenting your information in your classroom in a way that they understand, then they won't have to use their native language or talk as much to people around them to understand what's going on, or just socially, that if you make the proper environment in your classroom, that it really won't be that much of an issue and you won't seem like a cop if you're a friend to them, if you're warm to them and instructing correctly.
Mm-hmm. And I think that as teachers who are promoting the English only have to realize that they aren't as you guys said, cops, knowing that these students are going to take some time to adapt, but then promoting English only in a way that's not going to seem so only English only, and like you can do nothing with your native language kind of thing. So I think that these teachers also need to be aware of this kind of situation as well.
Nice. So now we'll just move on to closing statements, English only.
Okay, so our first one. Keeping ELL students in the general education classroom will be overall beneficial for both the student and the teacher. And full immersion into a class prevents ELL students to rely on their preferred language and allows them to focus on learning English quickly and efficiently.
And then our last closing key point is that the only way to become fluent in a language is to be immersed into the language. And again, so like if they're immersed constantly, it'll help them learn it and help them become fluent as well.
Nice. Bilingual education.
Yeah, so to rebut that claim that they're going to be, picking up the language a little bit faster, it's also going to cause an emotional trauma on the students. The fact that they're, being thrown into this deep end per se, as I keep using that. They're being thrown into a classroom where they have absolutely no idea what's going on. They can't understand a word, especially with these stage 1 learners. They might have been in the country for, 1 or 2 weeks possibly. It can be as little as that. Parents may not speak any English. So that can be a little bit traumatic for students. Whereas if it's a more gradual transition, it's less of it's still going to be traumatic, I think, no matter what. If you're going to somewhere over, it's a new environment, even if it's a student just transferring to a different school, it's always going to be a little bit of a stressful situation. Yeah, go ahead.
Overall, students who are involved in bilingual education are much less likely to fall behind. This is because they have their instruction and their worksheets and everything in both English and their native language. So they're able to use that as a reference, and seeing both of them together, they'll be able to learn pretty quickly like what that word means, because they see it in their native language and then they see it in English, so they won't fall behind as much.
Yeah, and to rebut your claim that English is the only way, that being immersed in is the quickest way to actually pick up on that language, and definitely in some cases that's correct, especially if you're talking about a college student who's going off on a study abroad trip, and they might already have some knowledge of the culture. But if you're talking about elementary students who are coming in, they're coming in blind, they really don't know what's going on. So if you do that sort of Google Translate thing where you translate your lessons, or even if there's a co-teacher, you're going to be able to connect into the vocabulary, things like that, where you're seeing it both in your native language and that native language, and eventually you're going to start picking up on those similarities between cognates in certain words, or even the location, placement between words and sentences, start learning the grammatical structure.
And then students who are involved in bilingual education are also able to be proud of their native heritage and culture, as well as open expressing it to others. I think that's very beneficial.
Yeah, it creates a classroom environment where all students are welcome, and that kind of students won't be excluded at that point. It's almost you can use these students as a tool to educate other students in terms of making them more culturally diverse, more cognizant of different student backgrounds, different people that they might interact with throughout their life.
Yeah, and it would also make for a good history lesson too, to incorporate their native country.
For social studies, that's absolutely crucial, because you get these students, they're not, it's not reading out of a textbook. You can get these students to just talk about their experience, if they remember anything, or some culture, some things they might have, like holidays they might do at home, different foods, things like that. And definitely, like I said, it makes the class more diverse, and you use these students as an asset.
Definitely, I'm not afraid to open up.
Nice. Thank you for sharing your opinion.